Welcome everyone to today's University of Texas Energy Symposium for February 3rd, 2026. I'll introduce myself in a second here, being a quasi-part of the panel. But before we introduce today's panel of speakers, I'll mention what's coming up in the next 2 weeks. So next week is a University of Texas alumnus from the Jackson School of Geosciences, Jake Jordan. He's the Chief Science Officer of Maseeh Carbon, and he's going to talk about enhanced rock weathering for improved smallholder farmer welfare at-scale case study for rice agriculture in India. The talk is really his company won the X Prize, and they're really about carbon sequestration, absorbing CO2 from the atmosphere via rock chemistry and enhancing that. So if you want to learn about sort of cutting edge direct carbon removal from the atmosphere, the next week is your talk, and he'll be speaking twice on campus as well. He'll be speaking February 12th in the Jackson School also. After that, we'll have Michael Craig from the University of Michigan talking about decarbonizing the electric power sector and warming world. So an energy systems take on this. Today is a pleasure to sort of have a host 5 of our distinguished colleagues here on campus at the University of Texas for sort of a roundtable discussion, which will take questions from you, the audience. Some of you, the audience of students, have already submitted questions to me, and so we'll start with some of those. But if you have a question in the audience here, raise your hand. If you're online on Zoom, then type your questions in the question and answer feature of Zoom, and I will be monitoring that as well. With that said, we'll just go through the introductions here, starting with myself. So yes, I'm Carey Keene, research scientist and assistant director at the Energy Institute here at the University of Boston. For the purposes of today, my expertise are in energy systems modeling, macroeconomics, and some environmental impacts of energy. Next one, Hugh Daigle. Go ahead, Hugh.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Hugh Daigle. I'm a professor in Petroleum and Geosystems engineering, and I also run the Sustainable Energy Minor, which, if anybody's interested in that, you can talk a little more about that. But my expertise is in gas hydrates, geohazards, carbon management. I have a lot of work going on with that right now, and fluid flow in porous communities. Happy to be here with you.
Thank you, Hugh. Jim.
Yes, I'm Jim Dyer. I'm a professor in the McCombs School of Business, where I teach courses in decision and risk analysis. And along the way, I've done some consulting and done some research related to energy. I was involved in testimony a long time ago about the South Texas Nuclear Project, and was also involved in some testimony before the Utility Commission, which existed at that time before deregulation, related to the CREZ lines that go into West Texas. And so I was looking at the risks and economic aspects associated with those sort of.
Very well. Carl.
Kockelman. I'm a professor in transportation engineering, which is Department of Civil Engineering next door. I've been here 27 years. Do a lot of travel demand forecasting and the impacts in all sorts of ways. So certainly energy and emissions, and trying to forecast the future of people's fleet decisions. That your households often have fleets of vehicles, maybe 1 or 2, and the transition to different drivetrains and different destination and mode choices, including for long distance like aviation, which is really critical to decarbonize. Great to be here.
Thank you.
Diana Marculescu. I'm a professor of electrical and computer engineering here at UT Austin. I've been here for 6 years only, but I've worked my entire career in energy efficient computing. We're looking at making hardware aware machine learning algorithms that are amenable to being deployed on personal devices. My research has spanned everything from design automation for low power design, computer architecture, and more recently using AI and machine learning to make systems more energy efficient and vice versa, making machine learning and AI more energy efficient by using innovations in both hardware and hardware.
Excellent, thank you. And next slide.
My name is Alexandros. I'm a professor at the Jackson School of Geoscience. I was recruited by UT 10 years ago. I designed and developed the seismic network for the state of Texas. A project that started due to the usage missed in the state that was active at that time. My background is geophysics and geoscience. I've been working in the industry for a couple of years on exploration geophysics, and then I moved to academia working on earthquake hazard until I moved to UT, but I'm mostly working on observational seismology and assessment of usage and understanding the global factor that needs to be.
Excellent. All right. So thank you again, all of you, for joining us. And we'll now just kind of break into some question and answers. I'll start with a couple that have already been asked beforehand and sent to me, but anybody at any time, if I'm looking out to you in the audience, please just raise your hand if you have a question and I will try to get to you. So let me there we go. All right, so let's start with this one, which is kind of on oil and gas in Texas. The nature of resource intense nature of natural gas and oil extraction in West Texas, thinking about water needs and seismicity in the coming years and produced water and dealing with this. What is the viability of this industry as a whole and the state going 10 or 20, 30 years forward? Or you say, what are the challenges that are currently being dealt with? And you and Alexandros have already mentioned a couple things, but either you want to start?
Okay, go ahead. So the viability of this industry, I'll start just with the reply first of all, and then I'll explain. Is bigger than 10, 20, 30 years. We have estimated that first of all, though we see due seismicity, the industry has managed to mitigate the risk that is related with the seismicity. So the seismicity in the state had a peak in 2020 and 2022. 2022, just to give you some number, the seismicity of the state of Texas was higher than the state of California, which is the first time that's happening in the United States. But after that, things have changed a lot. So the industry has found ways to mitigate the risk by just using different geological formations to inject the wastewater, and also change a bit also the process how they do that. And I have to say that the last couple of years, there are a lot of coordination actions by the industry. There are what we call operator-led response plans that they manage to keep the seismicity at a low level, and that means a higher magnitude of up to 3.5. We have seen there are some small cases. We have like swarms of earthquakes that seismicity goes a bit, but I think we are much better than we would have been like 3-5 years ago. Now, the plan regarding the wastewater and what we will do with this, it seems that as far as we currently know regarding the subsurface, which is the big unknown here, the capacity of the subsurface is higher than 30 years. So most likely we will be fine with it. But of course, this will need to be updated, I would say like on an annual or biannual plan, because you never know what will be the reaction of the subsurface for the water we inject.
You follow up?
Yeah, I'll follow up a little bit on that. So, yeah, there's been a lot of advancements over the past 5 or 10 years in understanding best ways to deal with produced water. There's also a lot of opportunity that I think people are realizing that there could be valuable things in the produced water, for example, lithium and other elements that are important for batteries and that sort of thing. So there's an opportunity there that I know people are looking at. But you know, well, now I've lost my train of thought. That's okay. Yeah, you know, in terms of the water management there and dealing with induced seismicity and where to put the water, there's still a big need for better uncertainty quantification and understanding the best places to inject your water. And a lot of that has come about through trial and error. But we're getting better at being able to characterize the subsurface in more of a quantitative fashion along with, uncertainties and better risk assessments and that sort of thing through advances in computational methods and that sort of thing. So I think it's an evolving area, and the industry is acutely aware of the problem because it affects our social license to operate, right? You don't want oil companies injecting wastewater if it's going to cause damaging earthquakes, and so they're putting a lot of effort into it.
In this context of oil and gas, is it getting is there a constraining aspect on disposing of produced water that holds back drilling, or not yet? Are we running out of places to inject water? Okay. Very well. All right, move on to, unless anybody else has anything to say on oil and gas and water. Let's go on this one here, which is perhaps Kara. If autonomous vehicle fleets become the norm, do we risk quote induced demand, where people travel more because it's easier, ultimately increasing total energy consumption and then lowering it? So how do we think about, I don't know, autonomous vehicles, or what do we know about that and how much that might take off?
Yeah, well, we're very fortunate that the light duty vehicle fleets, like the cars and, trucks, pickup trucks, that tend to be electrified drivetrains, so that helps a lot. And I will send you a paper that we wrote on the energy impacts of autonomous vehicles. On the trucking side, that's harder to electrify because of some of the long distance, but we've seen, Amazon delivery, that's electrifying, and those will probably be autonomous for too long if they aren't right now. I think anytime you make anything less expensive, you see more consumption of it. But the big cost when you travel is your time. So one of the issues is that we're reducing the value of travel time for those travelers because they don't mind being in the car. The drivers don't have to do this anymore and try to avoid hitting something. They can focus on more meaningful tasks. So I do expect people to stop flying at short distances much, so under 500 miles, that'd be like the Texas Triangle, a lot of these shorter haul flights, and taking to the ground on sort of self-driving buses where there might be an attendant on board serving food and that kind of thing, or just, get in an Uber with 3 other people who have business that day, and have sort of this door-to-door opportunity to hopefully share a ride. So the reason I got into autonomous vehicles is not because I found them fascinating, but because I knew that they would make driving easier. And this country already has an addiction to driving for all sorts of reasons, late historical development. So that technology was already in play when a lot of our population was added, a lot of land available to us. So I've always worried about the emissions, the gridlock, congestion, as bad as it would be. I mean, we could easily gridlock our streets with just another 20% of added vehicle miles traveled during peak times a day. So I think, one huge requirement is no empty driving by privately owned autonomous vehicles. Our policy makers and all of us as, citizens who elect these people cannot allow empty driving by privately owned vehicles. Now, Elon Musk and others may say, oh, well, you own it, but we'll manage it for you and we'll share your vehicle with others when you're in a business meeting or something. And that would be permitted, but I would hold those fleets of shared autonomous vehicles or robo-taxis to under 20% empty driving, where they get credits for shared rides between strangers. And when I say strangers, maybe women only share with women. Lyft had, Lyft Pink and things like that. If people are scared to share rides with strangers, I've always had great experiences. And usually, when I order an Uber share, it's with men. And when I order a Pink share, they usually put me with women. So, I never told them I was female, but somehow they figured it out. And so we do share rides all the time, like in elevators and airplanes, where you're really right next to the person. So I do hope that, Americans and others will get used to sharing. And so I think China and many countries are looking at a ride sharing, a ride pooling. So it's called ride hailing. What's happening right now? It's not ride sharing unless you're lucky enough to be given that option to share a ride, which is pretty rare on your phone apps. And Waymo, of course, isn't doing it yet between people who don't know each other. But I think that's going to be key, in addition to the zero tolerance of empty driving by a privately owned vehicle. Because if you're in a business meeting and somebody, runs into your car, or your car, stalls in the middle of an intersection, you've got to have immediate response. But when we do simulate the added driving of this sort of reduced value of travel time and everything, and added freight, we're looking at about 25% more vehicle miles traveled in this state. And so that means, you know, gridlock unless you start pricing your roadways, which technology, the costs have come down. You talked about edge computing, but you know, this sort of road pricing, which Manhattan has a very simple version of it, right? A simple cordon. And Singapore's is more complex, but Singapore shuts down vehicle ownership to begin with. So like you can't even get a license to own a vehicle in Singapore unless you bid for it. So it's an auction. And I think Beijing has a lottery for vehicle ownership now, but the cat's already out of the bag. They let anybody own an EV. In Singapore, you also have to have a parking space. So there's things we can be doing. I think policy making is really the lag here. We haven't raised our gas taxes in 33 years now at the federal or the Texas state level. Other states have raised their state portion. There's just a lot of policy we should be doing differently in the transportation sector, I think, to avoid those issues.
All right, making people, harder for people to park. We'll see if we.
Yeah, we just got rid of parking minima in Austin, so we're like up there with Minneapolis and just a few other places. Pretty progressive and sophisticated here.
Does that mean when you build a new building, you don't have to have minimum parking? Is that what you mean?
Right, but a lot of developers will still do it because they're scared of, you know, nobody wants to have a business there or a home here.
Right. One of the questions here was, can you explain Jevons paradox? Which Tara somewhat discussed that a little bit, but the original Jevons paradox was if you make steam engines more efficient at using coal, and the steam engine we used to pump out water from coal mines and tin mines in the United Kingdom, then the coal coming out would be cheaper and you'd be able to make more profits, and you'd invest the profits in making more steam turbines and more iron furnaces to make more iron products, including steam engines, and the economy would grow because you got more efficient. You would ultimately end up consuming more energy in the long run. So that was one of the questions, and that's something I study and work on modeling myself. And I'd say that to date, we've seen that that trend in the sense that over 200 years, we've been working to make machines more efficient, and we sort of have more population, more machines, and more energy consumption that goes through these machines. So that is it's a challenge or a benefit depending on who you are. It's a course of business to some degree, making things more efficient. If you want to reduce consumption and reduce environmental impact, then it's kind of a challenge in the overall sense of doing that, just because you expand the scope of activities. So with that, I'll go to there's questions, of course, on data centers, so maybe we'll switch to that. So we have an expert on computing and algorithms. So there's one comment or one question. It's kind of using the phrase sustainable computing. So I'm not 100% sure what that means. If you have a feel for what that is, but thinking along the lines of whatever we're using it for, including autonomous vehicles or other artificial intelligence solving different kinds of algorithms. There's sort of two-part question here. One part, are we trading fossil fuel consumption for minerals and metal consumption? And is this a risk? Are you just switching, dependence on one type of resource for other types of natural resources, minerals and metals? And how do we generally think about, I guess, electricity, natural gas use, or other impacts of data center expansion, which is a large part of the discussion. So I don't know. Donna, you want to start?
Yeah, so actually the question has sustainable in quotes.
Yes, it does. So that's why, you get to define it perhaps.
But I mean, ideally, sustainable computing, as the name or title implies, it's not gonna hit environment as much, and it's supposed to have an energy footprint that is not just in operation or usage, but also the total cost of ownership from manufacturing all the way to end of life. So I think that's a very valid question. We hear all the time about the impact of data center or computing that is done in data centers. It's projected that the energy footprint of that is going to be, at the end of the decade, will be 10% or more, which to me is crazy, because when I started doing work in this space, it was single digits, actually below single digits. But now it's actually everyone has access to try pick your poison, ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, and very easy accessible to send a query in the cloud or generate some silly video of you doing something or replacing yourself with someone else. And I'm not gonna focus on those kinds of applications because those are not useful, but there are useful applications where generative AI could, create progress in medical, healthcare, education, and all those things. But we do need to think about are we moving in the right direction? So if you listen to Elon Musk, as was mentioned before, he wants to put data centers in space because of all the challenges that we have in powering them, cooling them, and making sure that workloads are run full speed at times. And I actually think it's a very bad idea. But of course, there was a question about crazy ideas or emerging innovations that we might know of. You might think that's one, but I have yet to see a way to do that effectively with minimal energy footprint. So when you look around you, you probably have seen in the press, in New York Times, or even Google has put out a white paper where they tell you what's the energy footprint or energy cost for, say, a query or generating a video, short video. And it's usually, it's a few seconds or a few minutes of watching TV or a few seconds or minutes or running your microwave. But then you have to put it in perspective. When was the last time you actually just watched TV? Maybe never. You use the TV in conjunction with streaming, and that's they don't compare it with streaming. They compare it with just watching TV, which of course is very energy efficient. The other thing is, okay, we compare it with using a microwave. We use it all the time, but imagine how many queries and what's the volume of data that is being used to answer those queries or generate video. That's actually much higher than the actual use that we can think currently of someone might be using a microwave versus someone running a query. I think those numbers are orders of magnitude different, when queries are much larger, I should say. So when you put everything together, any kind of comparisons, you have to contextualize them. So my answer to that is, I kind of hinted in my introduction. My answer to that is looking at ways to take all these large foundation models that actually we don't know how OpenAI is not open. Actually, we don't know what those models are or how they were trained. We kind of have an idea. Take those and make sure we're able to run them locally on personal devices. So your laptop or your phone or on autonomous car, instead of having to go to the cloud, send data, which might open privacy concerns. And all of that is prone to all kinds of errors in terms of communication and other things. So is this a viable solution? Yes, you can take large models and make them more efficient through, you quantize them, you compress them, you make them more power efficient, faster. Maybe they're not as good, but you don't really need, you're gonna check what you get anyway, right? You don't trust what you get. You shouldn't trust what you get. So you want a quick answer that you're gonna check quickly. Why don't you run it locally instead of having to use these huge models that you have to pay for them, and actually even though you pay for them, OpenAI is still running a huge deficit. So that model is gonna break at some point. I think it started to show, like NVIDIA got cold feet in continuing to fund OpenAI infrastructure. And I think the goal is to push all of these applications to the user where the data is. You're collecting the data locally, you're not collecting it in the cloud. The cloud just does its own thing. And Kara was asking me earlier, what do you expect to get out of that transition? If you do it right, just because these devices are more power efficient and because the models are smaller, you can get an order of magnitude efficiency. Of course, the question is, I'm putting more at your fingertips. Jamal's paradox, you're gonna use more of it. I mean, we already have super exponentially increasing personal devices, smartphones. Many of you may have multiple such devices, at least a phone and a tablet. Of course, your laptop. So when you put that in, that capability, of course, you're gonna, consume more energy. But can you at least reduce the load on data centers? And can that mean that we don't have to be crazy about putting data centers everywhere in places where maybe it doesn't make sense to put the, burden on the grid has to be upgraded, and then the cost is transferred to the consumer. And I don't know a lot about that. I hope others know. I'm just trying to give you an idea as to how that sustainability can be achieved more. But I do want to address one thing about minerals and materials. Of course, when you run things on portable devices, there's going to be a battery associated with it, and that's not something you can ignore. And it's not just the cost of manufacturing all these phones, tablets, you name it. It's the cost of operating and actually making sure that they're powered correctly. And of course, they're going to consume power. But when you put everything together, we need to think about, is it cheaper, more energy efficient to actually manufacture the projected number of such devices that will run all these applications, or just stay the course and stay with data centers? But definitely, I don't think they should be put in space.
Maybe we can come back to the practical
Right.
engineering of space or cooling without
Right.
air or something like this. We can shift to maybe a related question that's still on some of the challenges with paying for these infrastructures and connecting to the grid here. Maybe Jim might be able to help us. There's a question here on why does it take so long to build energy projects?
No,
It takes 10 or 15 years, and I guess the data center folks are, contending with this a little bit in the sense that they want power, and they're maybe wondering why they can't just immediately have it when they get their data center done. But Jim, you want to?
Well, I'll
Can
say
you
a
tell
few
us a
words
little
about
bit?
it. I'll
Yeah.
say a few words about it. And frankly, I looked it up because I hadn't seen the numbers recently. Depending on what sort of a facility you're trying to build, we're talking about building new power plants, for example. They do take anywhere from 5 to 15 years, depending on what sort of a power plant you're trying to develop. Small solar plants take less time to be developed, maybe 4 or 5 years, from what I understand. But if you're thinking about something like a nuclear power plant, you may be talking about 15, 16 years, as we saw with the plants that were opened in the South fairly recently. So it's quite a span. Depends on the sort of facility that you're going to try to build. One of the big delays associated with building a new power plant, while we're on that, is the notion of the environmental impact statement. And the environmental impact statement may take at least 2 years and possibly 4 or 5 years to be completed, and for the company that's building the new power plant to get approved to move forward. And as we've seen in the past, sometimes you get approval and then an administration changes in terms of the politics of the situation, and the permission that you've received, the license or whatever it is, received. There may be new roadblocks or new concerns that are raised. And so these things are not without the risk, even if you go through the first permitting process. So it takes a while to get an environmental impact statement. NEPA is the name of the procedure. And then after that, of course, the construction itself takes quite a while. And again, it depends on the size and scope of the facility you're trying to build. And then once you get the facility built, there may be a delay in being able to connect the facility and its power generation capability with the grid. You don't just finish the facility and say, okay, now we're ready to produce energy, and necessarily have that facility hooked up to the grid at that particular point. And so that in itself can take some additional time to have that done. So it's true, it does take a long time to build these power plants and have them operating, and I'm not sure how much time can be saved and be realistic in terms of concerns about the environment, which are very real, and I appreciate that, and we want to be careful with regard to those sorts of practices. The manufacturing processes or production processes, the building process themselves are going to take a long time. And again, I'm not sure how much those will be speeded up, and then perhaps connectivity to the grid. One would think that we could do a little better job of scheduling that. You know that a power plant is under construction and will be built. But nevertheless, it is a long process. It may take anywhere, as I see, from 4 to 15 or 16 years, you know, the kind of power plant that one is talking about building. So it's a big risk. And when you have that kind of uncertainty, I'm over in the business school, people don't like uncertainty. You don't want to invest a lot of money when you're uncertain about how long things are going to take and how long things are going to cost. So it's a real concern in terms of our planning for new facilities.
Yeah, I guess we've seen this in particularly offshore wind in the United States, with Trump administration. We've had canceling of permits to build, and then lawsuits are going to court, and then overturning the executive order or whatever the decree was from the executive branch for companies that had already committed large sums of money and had all the approvals and going forward. And just a little more question. Yeah, well, is it a follow-up on this? Or
Yes,
I'll come to it now. Okay, so we'll talk, go ahead.
okay, thank you. I had a question for Professor Dyer, kind of related to risks, but particularly with the nuclear industry. I'm wondering I know you've seen the developments in South Texas. What are some of those risks and different factors that go into what investors are thinking about?
Well, I saw it a long time ago in South Texas. South Texas project, as I think most people probably know, that was a conventional nuclear power plant that was built in the 70s when we were having an energy crisis, when we thought we were running out of natural gas and there was no more natural gas that could be produced. And so we had to go to alternative sources of energy. And so in the 70s, the state of Texas, in response to a concern about the shortage of natural gas, sort of think about that now, and in retrospect, technology changes and methodology change to produce natural gas, as we're well aware. But at that time, they built some of the large coal power plants, as well as 2 nuclear power plants that completed here in the state. The other is Comanche Peak, which is up in North Texas. And those took a lot longer than the companies who were involved anticipated. They cost a great deal more, and that was partly because of an accident. Where was that accident? Gee, I'm trying to think. Somebody here would know. 3 Mile Island. How can I get 3 Mile Island? Be on the tip of my tongue. But some of you may not have heard of that. There was an accident at a nuclear power plant called 3 Mile Island back in the 70s. And that changed the regulatory system such that there was much more scrutiny of the manufacturing process. The cost went up significantly and the time went up significantly. So these large power plants are going to cost a lot of money, and we've seen that. And perhaps some additional large nuclear power plants will be built, but partly because of the risk, I'm more excited about the possibility of having cheaper energy provided by nuclear power with these small modular nuclear reactors, and those are being produced or they're in the planning stages or in the early production stages for test reactors from several different manufacturers here in the state. The state has been very positive with regard to encouraging that. There's going to be a small modular nuclear reactor in a research mode that is anticipated to be installed at Abilene Christian College, and that's sort of an interesting thing. But that happens to be the home of the individual who owns the company that's very much involved in producing that particular small nuclear reactor. And there's another nuclear reactors. I think one is going to be is being planned to go into business to power a large facility that is in Alcoa, not Alcoa. Is it one out here now? One of the large refinery operations.
Dow Chemical has
Dow,
has a
Dow Chemical.
contract with a small
Yeah.
modular company to
Right. Thank you.
provide heat and power at their
Right.
facility.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that may be may turn out to be a better alternative for nuclear power. I think that's something to watch and perhaps make a significant impact on the.
Thank you.
Yeah, for those wanting a little bit of a hint on trying to model cost declines or innovation or building more technologies or building them more quickly and having the cost decline. Last January 27th episode here, just a week ago, was Jean-Francois Mercure, who is a specialist in that, talked about electric vehicles a bit. And one of the aspects of that is, how many things can you make? And, the more you make cumulatively, the cheaper it gets. And something like solar panels would make, I don't know, hundreds of millions of individual solar panels. So sort of imagine over making 100 million of something, it gets cheaper for small modular reactors. How many? You're probably not going to make 100 million. Make hundreds, 1,000. I don't know how many. So, to be figured out how much the price can go down. A little bit more on the sort of timing of building power grid infrastructure. Right, this is one of the motivations for data centers to power themselves, essentially behind the meter or not even connect to the grid. If they can do that faster, they still have to pass this environmental review, as Jim discussed, so you don't get a pass on that. And ERCOT here in Texas, we operate a little differently than some of the other markets like PJM, which is the largest electric market in the United States, who has a capacity market. So the challenge there is data center companies are affecting the load projections 3 ahead, and those 3-year ahead load projections are used to essentially, people bid into it, capacity market, and they will recoup some of their money for building the power plant based upon fees from this capacity market. But if they overproject the load and they've committed to pay these companies to build power plants and the load doesn't actually show up, then we're opening up this question of who pays for this infrastructure that might not be needed. Here at ERCOT, we don't have that kind of mechanism, so that type of risk to the consumer is not there, at least from a capacity market, for better or for worse. After Winter Storm Uri in 2021, people were complaining that maybe we didn't have a capacity market. Maybe they change their views every year as the energy situation changes. But any more views on installing infrastructure, timing of doing things, and challenges of this
I
kind?
just know in transportation, it also takes like 10 to 15, and the environmental impact statement may only take 2 or 3 years, but just the whole NEPA process of involving stakeholders at every stage and the litigious nature of this country. We have a lot of lawyers, and the way our courts of law are set up, it's pretty adversarial. Whereas in Europe, I think they're paying about half as much as we pay and able to get their projects done properly in about half the amount of time, because the communities trust their government agencies to do the right thing. They don't hassle them the way Americans do. So I think there is legislation right now, bipartisan, called the SPEED Act, that we may see go through. I don't know how much it'll speed things up, but a lot of people like us are fine, and the New York Times and others are getting a sense of how bad this is. A lot of economists are starting to complain about how bad we are at building things properly.
Right. People may have heard of this, yes, quote unquote abundance agenda. Why don't we just sort of build stuff, and going against the traditional NIMBY and environmental attitude of the 70s and 80s, which was try to protect things and don't just kind of build willy-nilly. But maybe it is. We don't have a lawyer to defend him or herself against Kara's argument. That's just building things up.
Lawyer.
Okay, so
Which side?
I'll have to check.
He works at UT.
Yeah, UT side. But yeah, that's it does seem to me to be this sort of trade-off between private rights, land ownership rights, private rights, which essentially the United States is roughly founded on, and building common infrastructure. And here we are, right? Okay, well, let's think. Well, we got kind of one general question, which I'll hold to the end. Again, raise your hand in the audience if you have something. One is just kind of our crystal ball question, but I'll hold that and go to one that's a little more specific on a technology kind of standpoint and interesting. So here's the sort of comment leading to question. Japan has been exploring methane hydrates to cope with energy dependency. Japan is an island. Republic of Korea imports pretty much 80 or 90% of its energy as fossil fuels and then others. So methane hydrates seem to represent a potential energy resource, as example, Japan going for this, but also a climate risk. It's another fossil fuel asset or resource. Is there a realistic pathway to extracting methane hydrates without triggering greenhouse gases, I suppose, in the process, fugitive emissions, and then I don't know, maybe people could comment, whether we should be doing it in general, if we have concerns about CO2 emissions. So we have a couple of geologists here. So any comment there? You start on on the hydrates.
Yeah, sure.
What do we know?
So if you all don't know what methane hydrates are, it's an ice-like structure where you've got water molecules arranged around a methane molecule. They're solid, and they occur in the kind of shallow subsurface on continental margins below the ocean, and also in permafrost areas below the permafrost. China, South Korea, and Japan have been looking at how to extract methane from hydrates. So this is an offshore operation. The two big issues with this are, well, the main issue with this is that the hydrates are solid, and to get the methane out of there, you need to turn it into a gas. Okay, and the only two ways you can really, well, there's three ways you can do it, but the only two practical ways you can do it are by heating it up or reducing the pressure in the subsurface. The third way is by chemical injection, but that's ridiculously expensive. And so the production tests, the Chinese have actually done several successful production tests recently using depressurization. And so it's basically, the same thing that you do in a lot of oil and gas operations when you've, put a pump down hole or something. So you're just, kind of pulling the stuff out. The big problem with that is that pumps tend to get clogged with sand because you don't just pull the gas and the water into the pump, they're typically in these unconsolidated formations, they pull the sand in. The pumps clog up. And that's an engineering challenge that hasn't been solved yet. The main issue that you run into is the cost. I was looking this up earlier today, and the kind of break-even natural gas cost is about 12 to 15 US per million BTUs. Right now the benchmark Henry Hub price here in the US is around $4. So, conventional natural gas, at least here in the US, is way, way cheaper than it is to get hydrates. Now, natural gas markets in Japan and South Korea are quite a bit different. Gas is quite a bit more expensive, so it is kind of economically feasible for them to look at that, and that's why they're really leading the charge over there. Now, you have to superimpose that on the recent rapid build out of liquefied natural gas export capacity here in the US. There's a lot of projections that could completely upend the global natural gas market by bringing prices down overseas in places where it's currently expensive, and B, increasing domestic prices here because there's demand overseas for what previously was basically a product we could only use here in the US. So, that could throw a wrench in the whole works, and I think it's yet to be seen how that's all going to work out. Although, if the countries keep viewing the US not as a reliable trading partner, maybe the demand won't be there. They'll be getting their natural gas from elsewhere. So that's that.
Okay, anybody else has a comment? It's safe to say that, methane hydrates are in the quote unquote resource category and not the quote unquote reserves where they know how to do it and it's cost effective. It's in the experimental or research stage at this point. So I guess a country like Japan would be interested in it because they're importing all their energy resources in. So right. All right, well, let's shift here. Get anything in the room? Got about 8 more minutes. We'll shift to kind of the grander questions here. There's a couple on just sort of, why do we have the technologies cheap enough to go, essentially all renewable and not use fossil fuels in the context of thinking about what we use. Let's just say, for example, petroleum. We don't just burn petroleum as gasoline fuels or diesel fuels in cars and engines, but we use it for other kinds of products and plastics and these kinds of things. So anybody want to break out their, start with their opinions on the challenges of phasing out fossil fuels or how far we can go either within the electric grid or just overall energy supply in general. I have any thoughts? I'll start if nobody wants to, but offering my panel. Yeah, raise your hand. No, anyone?
I'll take a stab at that. I mean, I think the big issue, and we've kind of touched on this already, is that if you electrify everything, you're gonna need a heck of a lot more transmission infrastructure. It doesn't matter where that electricity is, how that electricity is being generated, you just need to move it from point A to point B. You know, on sunny, windy days in West Texas, we're already curtailing a heck of a lot of wind and solar generation because there's congestion on the power lines bringing them to Austin, Houston, whatever. And that's, you know, the ability to build stuff rapidly is really going to come and bite us in the, you know what, so that's one item.
He used the REITs model from National Renewable Energy Lab, which is a different name right now, probably go back to Enron a few years. And we talked about just simple V1G charging. So if you electrify all the vehicles, I don't know about data centers and things like that, but we just very aggressively pushed up the envelope of electric vehicle adoption. Not trucks, but you know, I don't think they would be more than 20% of the energy demand of the household fleet or the light duty vehicle fleet in this country. And yeah, the V1G charging just by like 25% of EV owners really protects the grid from a lot of that congestion. So when you plug in, you don't automatically get max power or amperage. You get, you know, what they're ready to give you unless you're paying premium, right? Like at a Tesla supercharging station. But most people do power over long durations, like 4 hours or more. Overnight is very typical, of course. It's hard at maybe apartment buildings and other places where they don't have easy access to power that is metered to them. You know, they have to pay. But I do think that just that V1G charging where they can moderate, and Austin Energy already offers that. So I'm already a member of that, just like smart thermostats. It's just a really simple way to protect the grid from that kind of congestion. So I'm not worried. I do think we could totally electrify transportation. And I think China will do it first. You know, although it's a massive country, I do think that they will do it first.
Right. How much has
Now, I want to add
Go
something.
ahead.
The last few years, we have been working on a couple of projects that talk about energy storage in the subsurface. And I think this is coming up a lot because, I mean, energy coming from solar or from wind, I mean, you have to store it somewhere. If you don't use it at that time, you have to store it. So that's becoming a new thing. And I think it's important because especially for the state, for our state here, we have a lot of solar with wind. So we have to find a way to keep it.
Well, we did, I think you probably talked about this, we did have investors add battery storage all over the place, and that has brought down our risk of a grid loss event dramatically over the last few years. And so they're, I think, doing well. I think they're getting a quick payoff. They found sites that were already permitted, I think cellular tower sites, and they were just placing batteries there. That has been a great investment. Most vehicle owners don't want to push power back to the grid, but to protect your home and neighborhood to have power, I think most of us would be absolutely willing to do that. That's called vehicle to grid, V2G.
Does anybody have an idea, say, Kara, on the autonomous vehicle space, how much do you think that helps reduce fossil consumption? Let's just say, so if you electrify them, and there's a problem of, let's just say some people might want to buy an electric car, but they don't have charging infrastructure in their apartment or wherever they live, then the lack of car ownership plus these autonomous vehicles is perhaps a fewer number of cars and a fewer number of charging areas that somehow lead to less fossil
Yeah.
consumption in cars.
We have all these papers on
Is it-
these topics,
yeah.
you guys, like smart charging, the shared autonomous all electric vehicle fleet, and where to put the charging depots and public-private partnership for shared cords and all this kind of stuff. To, you know, if you monetize the emissions costs versus the, you know, grid provision costs and look at the wholesale pricing, which we get to do here in Texas and this ISO. And yeah, I think going with a fleet model where you don't have to privately own a lot of vehicles is great for most people. And we also micro simulate rural areas and getting these vehicles to them. And Yeah, I think especially if you're in a rural area, and there's not a lot of neighbors near you who are also requesting cars, just reserving a car, like 20 minutes ahead of time will work great in most locations. And so what that allows you to do is have a much smaller right size fleet rather than like your parents buy the biggest thing they can because they think, well, once a year we might go on a family vacation, so I need to throw the dog and all this stuff in there. Just order the vehicle that you need, and then you don't have to deal with maintenance. But of course, there's all these additional sensors and devices on these things right now, and that brings the cost up. And when they crash, which is rare, like Waymo's down 85% versus the human driving that's done on those same streets in San Francisco, Phoenix, LA. But so you're bringing down the cost, the losses from the crashes, which is great because that's a huge cost.
When you say Waymo's down 85%, was that mean?
They're
operating
at
85%?
15% per mile traveled, but they're traveling half empty. Okay, so if you I don't think that should be permitted long term. They should just get people to share the ride and just price it that way. Share the ride. It's like the corporate average fuel economy, right? Some people have to buy efficient ones, so the manufacturers have been underpricing those vehicles to make sure they meet that. Although that was recently resolved by the federal administration, I'm sure it'll come back in 3 years because it's just simple, obvious policy. Yeah, I am not worried about that. I think we would have, a smaller fleet. You just gotta watch out for people like putting bathrooms and beds in their vehicles and like just, living on the road between their 3 houses. There's a lot of excess consumption in this country because we are relatively rich. A lot of people have the money to buy those kinds of fun things. And yes, you can see a lot of electric RVs driving around honestly with people just doing whatever, and that would be a bad thing. So I do think that those kinds of luxury goods should be, seriously taxed.
Here we go. So maybe that takes us into might be the last question. Somebody can raise their hand. This one's a little bit broader here, which is about, decarbonizing. Is achieving decarbonization more a technology problem or a policy problem? I was talking about this interplay of what can the technology enable and should you prevent somebody from using a particular technology in a certain way because of some overarching policy. So the question here, the person asking the question implies that it seems like you can have environments that support technological development. And so it's not clear if the bottleneck is technology or policies. So anybody want to kind of start here? We'll kind of end on this crystal ballish.
Technology rather than policy.
Yeah. Or we can have a show of hands.
Policy rather than technology.
We can also we can also go to your hand for a survey.
Don't want to change the behavior. A lot of humans have a hard time changing their
Business decisions, right? I mean, pushing things like I said, pushing things on personal devices is not gonna work if you're gonna operate your personal device every 3 years, like you're being pushed to, right? I mean, your smartphone is as good as the operating system it runs. And if you can't run the current version of iOS, you're gonna have to upgrade, which goes against everything I've said. Because then, you throw it away, or they say they use it, they don't. I mean, I don't think they are, but yeah, it's policy, but also business decisions, right? And you can have policy that encourages or incentivizes certain business decisions. Because we can proselytize as much as we want, but you're gonna do what you have to do to do your, whatever your work is or your preferences are, right?
Jim, yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think it is, and I agree with the comments of the previous comments. I think it's more of a policy issue. I think the technology would be there to greatly reduce reliance on fossil fuels, for example. But on the other hand, do we really want to? And do we care whether we really want to? I mean, it is a political process, and people may not be willing to pay the price either in terms of perhaps loss of what they feel like is their personal freedom to go out and get in their car, which smells like them and has all their stuff in it, and not worry about it versus have to ride in a car that other people rode in just previously and it's not yours and you don't really have control over it just when you need it. So I think there's some issues there that have to do, I put it in maybe, I don't mean to be dramatic, but personal freedom versus policies that tell everybody you need to do this and you need to have this kind of a car, you need to have a charging station, this is what you're going to do. We'll have to make those choices. I think that'll be a little process.
So one thing I'll also add is, I also agree that it's a policy issue, but, and if you look at, just CO2 removal from the atmosphere, the only way you can make money doing that is by selling carbon credits. The utilization market is not big enough. Enhanced oil recoveries can only be carbon negative for a few years in a project. And so we don't know what the carbon credit market is going to look like and what the demand is. And so you need some kind of policies in place to help this along if we're interested in removing CO2 from the atmosphere.
Right, now I'll rephrase the question and then answer it in an annoying way perhaps. Is achieving decarbonization more so a technology problem or a policy problem? No, the answer is no, it's not one or the other. So I think that's what people are kind of getting at. You kind of made a good point. I view kind of the ultimate decarbonization backstop technology of, yes, a sort of a direct air capture, human engineered structure that sucks atmospheric air through some absorbers and injects CO2. That of course has a very large, cost or thermodynamic penalty of separating CO2 from the air that we're already not willing to do on power plants that have a higher concentration. So it's a pure cost to the economy, and the decision to encourage the development of that type of technology or something else is a pure cost that we haven't been willing to put on. That would be cheaper on a per ton basis on other types of infrastructure. It does exist on some types of infrastructure and oil plants and these kinds of things, but this is why the Dow chemical and small modular reactor example that Jim brought up earlier is perhaps attractive to them, that maybe that's the cheapest way to have low carbon plastics or petrochemicals. One of the questions was, can you really get rid of using all fossil fuels? Well, the question of whether you really need to. So if you use hydrocarbons as a feedstock to make plastic, but you don't burn them, and you don't have, you capture the CO2 from the chemical reactions of the plant, then the whole plant's powered by nuclear, then you have a much smaller CO2 footprint to capture. And when you're done with the plastics, in principle, you can bury them. That's like carbon sequestration versus recycling them. So we have these potential options, but yes, the policy is important because just say where we are today with Chinese manufacturing of solar panels. They invested heavily in manufacturing solar panels when it wasn't seen as profitable in other parts of the world. And now nobody can compete with them. And we have statements, and one of the questions here about getting off fossil fuels was renewable technology is so cheap now, solar, for example. And one of the reasons why it's so cheap is there was a commitment to invest in it when it wasn't cheap. So that's a policy decision. Anything else in questions in the room, or any other comments up here from the front?
I was really hoping to hear what people thought of as areas for saving energy or emissions that you haven't heard of. And so I really liked your edge computing response. Did you have any suggestions on that?
Or energy saving.
Yeah, new topics that people haven't been writing about.
I think what we haven't seen a lot, and as I said, we have been working recently with like battery storage on the subsurface, which is coming from the geothermal, not coming to towers of battery. This is something new, and it is a new technology. There is one test site here in South Texas, and there is interest from other groups to invest on that because it seems that it's an easy thing. I mean, you just use the energy and then store it in the subsurface, and you can take it back whenever you want. So that's has a positive impact, and that's renewable, really.
One of my colleagues is doing phased solar arrays to try to power airplanes in flight to keep them gliding or cruising, I guess. And so, that's the only thing I've heard of that you probably haven't heard of. Sorry. What about you, Hugh? Anything?
Oh, I think, storage technologies, the one I've been reading a lot about recently is just hot rocks, thermal storage. And I think we're going to be seeing a lot more investment in that.
Yeah, so I think these are good points. When you think about storage, you can store things under pressure, under heat. Geothermal is potentially a little bit of both, depending on when you're doing hot rocks, not just electrochemical things like the batteries on our phones. So this is research going on these here at UT. Anything we'd like to promote about UT going on here on the cutting edge? Maybe we've sort of discussed our expertise, which is on somewhat the cutting edge of these aspects. But before we close out. Obviously, got Kara, so if you have questions about, transportation and
I'll send you some
autonomous vehicles,
papers.
then
But what
she'll
I
flood you with
heard, you know,
information.
I heard Michael Weber say the other day in my class, which is also at this time, so thank you to my students for being here. That we pull so much more out of the ground for petroleum and than we do for batteries. And so like it's an order of magnitude, probably a 90% decrease, I think, for going electric if we can, even though it requires batteries. And yeah, he doesn't seem too worried about the source of those materials.
Yeah, something I study is material flows of the entire country of the United States, and you look at all the mass that we've extracted and put into stuff. Over half, something like 50%, 60% is rocks. It's just roads and concrete, essentially, and aggregate underneath buildings. So most of the mass we pick up is rocks. Second most is fossil fuels, and then some of that mass goes into the atmosphere, and that's what some of our concern is. So, all right, so let's leave it there. I mean, thank one at a time here before we do an applause. But Jim Dyer, McCombs School of Business, Hugh Daigle, Hildebrand, Department of Petroleum Engineering, Carey, Kockelman, Department of Civil, Architectural and Environmental Engineering, Diana Marculescu from Department Chair of here at the Electrical Engineering Department, and Alexandros Savvaidis of the Bureau of Economic Geology, the TexNet program. So thank you all for joining us here, and thank you for